California police have released further details into the motor vehicle crash that led to the DUI arrest of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband on Saturday night. According to authorities, 82-year-old Paul Pelosi's 2021 Porsche was struck in Napa Valley by a 2014 Jeep as he was attempting to cross State Route 29. No injuries were reported.
Pelosi was arrested for DUI about 80 minutes after law enforcement responded to the scene and booked in the early hours of Sunday morning with $5,000 bail. Joining us now to discuss is Ryan Tait. He's a former candidate for Maricopa County attorney, former prosecutor, now DUI defense attorney. So Ryan, tell us, is this pretty typical? I mean, we know the Pelosis are really wealthy. So a lot of people are thinking this guy, he's not going to see any jail time. Other people would see jail time for something like this, possibly, but they're rich, so he's going to get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it changes necessarily that he's rich. Jail time would be unlikely for a first-time DUI for anybody in California, unless you have some really serious aggravating circumstances. If the person was swerving all over the road and kind of driving really crazy, then you could see some jail time. But typically, you don't see jail time for a first-time offense in California. There's exceptions, obviously, but that would be true whether he's rich or not, generally speaking.
It does seem like the finances come into play when we're talking about bail. I know $5,000 might not seem like a lot to some people, but there are many people who can't come up with a percentage that you need to pay to get out with a bail like that. And there has been an ongoing conversation over the last few years about bail reform for that exact reason, that it does seem like there's a penalty based on how much money you have, as whether or not you spend the night in jail or many nights in jail, or whether you can just pony up and go home and sleep in your own bed.
Well, that's one of the things I noticed about this case is that he had a $5,000 bail, which struck me as high when I first looked at that. And so I went to the booking record, and there was somebody else who was booked on DUI charges that same night who had a $1,000 bail. So, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be a deterrent for people who the court suspects might not show up for their court dates. I wouldn't personally think that somebody like Paul Pelosi would fail to appear at his court date, but their finances do come into play, and losing $5,000 might not mean as much to somebody who has the means to pay it. And so that could have been what the judge was thinking in this case.
Yeah, it is kind of strange to set it at $5,000. I mean, if they're setting somebody else's at $1,000 and they're setting Paul Pelosi's at $5,000 with this idea of, well, you know, this will maybe deter you. I mean, $5,000 to Paul Pelosi. What are these people worth? The Pelosis are worth over $100 million. So $5,000, he probably spends that at lunch.
He's probably got $5,000 sweaters. Yeah, I don't think that $5,000 is going to make a difference for him in this case. But the decisions that judges make on bail aren't always fully rational. It's just, well, he makes more money, so I've got to give him more than I usually give. And $5,000 is quite a high bail for a first-time DUI.
Do we know anything about who was at fault in the crash? Because when this was first reported, it was reported just as a drunk driving incident, not that the police came to the scene because there had actually been a crash.
Yeah, the reports that I've read indicate that his car was struck, and that's really the only clue that we have as to who caused it. Usually if he had caused the accident, it would say that he struck another vehicle, would be the language you might expect, but I didn't see any details about who caused it other than this implication that he was struck by the Jeep, which in my mind says he wasn't at fault. And also, if you cause an accident while you're under the influence of alcohol, oftentimes there's additional charges that would be filed. It could be an endangerment. It could be something like a criminal damage, or even an assault if you're running into another vehicle while you're drunk. So I think it's likely the other driver was at fault here.
That's interesting, because the way I read it, I just thought maybe he pulled out in front of the car. You know, he like ran the red light or pulled out in front without looking and just kind of took the other car by surprise potentially. And it was because he was drunk. He wasn't paying attention. That's kind of the way I thought, in my mind, it maybe played out, just because he did end up with the DUI.
Well, it says that he was, it says he was trying to cross the interstate. And so you typically think that might be the scenario, but I would be surprised if that was the case and there wasn't any additional charges. But if it was just a minor fender bender, perhaps the police who cited him just thought we won't need any additional charges here. I think that it's probably one of those situations. Either the damage wasn't significant enough to charge something else, or it was the other driver's fault.
Well, Speaker Pelosi's Democratic Party challenger, Shahid Buttar, weighed in on the arrest, telling the New York Post, quote, "More people are coming to recognize the corruption of the incumbent, which is ultimately why I ran. As important as it is to prosecute drunk driving, the Pelosi family's continuing history of insider trading and Nancy's refusal to debate any challenger since 1987 are frankly even more scandalous." Is he right? Is that what we should be talking about right now, as opposed to her husband's fender bender?
Well, look, I've represented priests, I've represented prominent business people, I've represented a lot of individuals in DUI cases who you don't think of as criminals. And DUIs, as much as they are a risk to people on the road, the reality is most people who drink alcohol have probably committed a DUI and never been caught for it. It's just very, very easy to do. And so, yeah, I think that the issues that are more important to the country, and especially for somebody who's in a prominent and powerful position like Nancy Pelosi, I think we ought to be focusing on what she's doing in that office, first of all, rather than her husband's personal life. And this is, as bad as it is, we don't want to encourage DUIs, and they're certainly a problem. But this incident, I don't think, has much of a bearing on who Nancy is as a Miss Pelosi, as a political leader. So I think we should be focusing on issues that voters probably care about more.
Yeah, that's probably a really good point. I mean, it's not really I don't even think she drinks. I think she's completely dry. But you know, and I understand that, yes, this is not the thing that we should be focusing on because it doesn't really have anything to do with her. But I think what the public, and kind of going back to my first question to you on it, is the public kind of has this perception that people that are wealthy and in power get away with things. And so I think people are really curious as to whether or not Paul Pelosi is going to get some sort of lighter sentence or lighter treatment. He's going to be treated with kid gloves on this thing compared to somebody else. But you're saying, no, it sounds like he's actually getting, even though $5,000 for him is nothing, it's still a lot higher than anybody else. And so, I mean, so we can see he's probably not going to get any jail time, but you're saying neither would anybody else really in this.
Yeah, unless there's some unusual fact, I don't think that he would likely get jail time, even if he was somebody that you've never heard of or that nobody's ever heard of. And the reality is, in our criminal justice system, yes, the rich and the powerful do get an advantage. I don't think there's any question about that, whether it's because they can afford better representation, or in some jurisdictions, having a connection with people in power can be a significant thing. And the people that are most affected negatively by the criminal justice system are people of low income and socioeconomic status. But for a first-time DUI, I don't think that people should be sounding the alarm bells if he's not doing jail time, if he just gets probation. That would be something you would expect for somebody who's never been in trouble before.
Yeah, and look, it was really interesting that the Washington Post even did this story about Shahid Buttar, given how much he's kind of been cleansed from the national discourse despite running against Nancy Pelosi a few times. And despite, I think, the really good point he makes, which is the woman has not debated anybody, has not had to defend her beliefs since 1987. And although I think the article takes an interesting posture towards Shahid, has a picture from DJing, refers to him as far left, all these kinds of things, it does point out that, speaking of rich people getting away with stuff, in December, the speaker disclosed that she and her husband had scooped up millions in bullish call options for stocks including Google, Salesforce, Micron Technology, and Roblox. At the same time, insiders told the Post that she was slow-walking efforts to rein in big tech. That month, Pelosi defended the right of lawmakers to get rich from the market, telling reporters we are a free market economy and should be able to participate in that. And then in March, bought $2.2 million in Tesla stock, even as some in Congress proposed lawmakers and their spouses be banned from stock trading. This is, I think, in a lot of ways, the real story here. So I'm interested to hear if this incident with her husband does bring more attention to the race between Nancy Pelosi and Shahid Buttar, and perhaps gives him an opportunity to draw some of those really important contrasts.
Well, we focus a lot on the low-level street crimes in America. Meanwhile, there's people on Wall Street that walked away with billions of dollars after the 2008 financial crisis because of a problem that they caused, that caused many Americans to lose their homes, lose their life savings. And the people that did that didn't see a day in jail, while people that are committing shoplifting and stealing a few $1,000s here and there are looking at years in prison. So I think that the point is well taken. We need to focus on the crimes that are actually affecting thousands and thousands of people and treat those things on par with the type of fervor that we've treated street crimes for many, many years in America. There's no question.
Yeah. Time for Nancy Pelosi to retire. I can't believe she's even running again. I mean, at this point, she's risking going to hell, right? I mean, they told her she can't take communion anymore. I mean, look, the woman is like 82, 83 years old. It's at this point, why doesn't she just say, okay, I've got enough personal problems right now. The church is telling me I'm going to go to hell if I don't say that I'm pro-life. Basically, I can't take communion. And she's very devout Catholic. And now her husband, it's like, she's got to think God's punishing her at this point. Now her husband gets a DUI and he's 82, 83 years old also. It's just hang it up, Pelosi. Give it up. Move on. Go to heaven. Retire and go to heaven.
Kim.
Maybe.
Kim, you're hilarious. Look, Ryan, I think that you made a really great point about the fact that we don't really focus on white collar crimes, despite them often having a farther reach and hurting more people. So I appreciate you for that and for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We'll have more Rising after this.